Long years ago, eminent jurist Nani Palkhivala used to run a very famous series of budget commentaries. After every budget, he would hold a sellout crowd spellbound by his comments on what he thought about the budget. Most of the time, what he said was not laudatory.
In fact, if you know the conditions in the outside world, it would bring tears to your eyes to consider what's the state of this country.
Decades later, listening to Nirmala Sitharaman's budget for FY 23-24, I was often tempted to think what would have happened if the grand old man had listened to this budget. I am sure he would have been thoroughly pleased. Decades of what he had been telling the India government to play by the rules, set a realistic target, decide on capital expenditure, and let the economy, the India's vast population, get on with their job. The prescription, the mantra, which this and a few other budgets before this have imbibed, would have pleased him like nothing. There's only one thing that, slightly raises, I would say, a bit of a cloud. What is this? The shenanigans of the Adani group. Mind you, the two things, the budget and the Adani problems in the stock markets, are not related at all. The government has very clearly impressed on the middle class, and this is a very impressive achievement, that it pays in modern India to play by the rules, which is why the Adani episode raises a one small query, and that is what we shall be discussing in this issue of On Point. News media often run ranking of budgets out of 10. This time, there's a good possibility that they might end up awarding full marks. Like in gymnastics, when in 1976 Montreal Olympics, Nadia Comaneci scored a perfect 10 and forced the judges to revise the rules for awarding a perfect mark. Nirmala Sitharaman has achieved, as finance minister, a very similar feat. And she has done it by setting herself close to rules. It's a major achievement, and why? Because these rules that she had set for herself was that the fiscal deficit target will be adhered to. She is adhered to, sticking to a 6.4% GDP, and for the next year she has set a glide path. Also, she had made a commitment that the public expenditure on capital, or rather the capital expenditure, will be raised, and she has raised it handsomely, going over rupees 10 lakh crore.
In its speech for 21-22, I had announced that we plan to continue the path of fiscal consolidation, reaching a fiscal deficit of below 4.5% by 2025-26, with a fairly steady decline over the period. We have adhered to this path, and I reiterate my intention to bring the fiscal deficit below 4.5% of GDP by 2025-26.
These have not happened suddenly. Over the past few years, the government of India has cleaned up the capital sector. Two reforms come to mind immediately. One of them is the passage of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. The other is the passage of the GST. What have they done? They have ensured that the rules for raising capital has become straightforward, honest. In the process, the government has been able to steer off re-provisioning the public sector banks continuously. So essentially, the government in the process has been able to take away a large part of the money that it was earlier spending to instead spending on capital. Look at this chart. The Government of India will be honest, the nominal GDP shall be painted conservatively, and tax expectations like last year will be conservative. That means there is buoyancy of just 1. What does it mean? Again, that the money is left on the table to spend on socially desirable projects. It also allows for projects which have got political dividends and are socially responsible, like the Eklavya school budget, the plan for 38,000 teachers for these schools, or the revamped teachers training by district institutes of education and training, or the PM particularly vulnerable tribal group PVTG development mission. Similarly, the continuation of the food grain scheme free for 80 crore Indians for 1 more year. And these trends have been happening despite the COVID. Here, I must make a confession. In one of my last episodes, I had said, or rather expected, that the government will be forced to give out doles to especially the vocal middle class. That has not happened, and that's a remarkable achievement. So, no doles for the middle class. Instead, the money has been conserved, as I said, to spend on capital expenditure massively, like roads and railways, as this chart shows, or to spend for the poorest. It means that the rest of the Indians have to go out into a market where the rules have been set properly to raise money, for instance, like the startups, to source it either from the markets or from the banks, and for others to try to use their skills to develop their abilities, to develop their life chances. This is a very big change. For instance, look at the new income tax regime that has been brought in over the last couple of years, and this time has become the default option. What is the finance minister saying? That don't ask the government to create savings tax based for you. Instead, pay the government the taxes. There will be no personal or particular set-offs or sort of exemptions clauses, cluttering up the income tax to make it complicated for the average middle class, but great for, say, chartered accountants or others to show you ways to weave through. So, how has the middle class reacted? They have actually moved in to the financial sector to organize their savings. Look at the data, and this data is not just from this year, but for the past 2 years. The middle class, the retail investors today are a very major force in the capital markets. In fact, the FIIs and the DIIs, the two battles that we always have seen, the foreign institutional investors and the domestic institutional investors, that category now faces a very big change by the huge presence of the retail investors. Look at this data on the retail investors in the market. I mean, that's a very big force, and their presence is a very big vote of confidence in the policies of the Government of India. This is something that needs to be understood very carefully, because otherwise they would not have been there. When times of crisis come, people, economic theory tells us, move to safe haven assets. What are those? Gold, real estate. What's happening in India? It's still early days to say people are moving out big time from gold or real estate, but, and it's that big but, the numbers are showing that the interest level among the retail investors for investing in the markets have risen very sharply. It is not a coincidence, it is not a one-off thing, it is a very strong movement that has happened, and this happens, as I said, only when people have faith in economic policies of the government of the day. So, how does the current swing in Adani stocks affect this India story? Well, first of all, a company stock can go up or go down. That's inevitable in a market. It can also be hit by adverse reports, very major adverse reports. That also can happen. Those are not surprising. What is, however, not happening, and this is something that I touched in an earlier episode. The thing that is not happening in all this is when investors, retail investors, come into the market, they need a good referee. Imagine it like a good football match. A good football match can only happen if the referee is strong and willing to blow the whistle, but not to stop the match, but to ensure there is fair play. Indian regulators have been, or rather been seen to have been found wanting in this particular episode or in other episodes also. It's a systemic problem that needs to be corrected. And this is where I think the role of the government of India becomes important. It has done a very creditable job of changing the face of budget, changing the very tenor of budget to make it business-like, to make it what it should be. That look at the big things, let the people take care of the minor things. It is now necessary for the government of India to also look at this regulatory gap that's there in India. Remember, India already, as we speak, by March this year will be a $3.5 trillion economy. It's a huge economy. The world, and forget about the world, but if by any other reckoning, this is an economy that is expected and will almost certainly grow to fantastic heights. When that happens, one of the things that you need, and one of the very critical things that you need, is regulatory muscle. It's not about saying, taking pot shots at this person or that person. I make it very clear. But it's about telling the retail investors that keep on investing in the market, keep on investing in financial sector. India rightfully is not a dole-based economy anymore. The trillions of dollars will kept on adding to the Indian GDP as the years progress. And that means more responsibility. Responsibility for whom? Responsibility for the government, responsibility of the middle class, responsibility of the regulators. As we speak, both RBI and market regulator SEBI have issued their first statements. These are hugely reassuring for retail investors, telling them the referees are watching keenly. These are not yellow cards, mind you. They give the confidence, however, that the markets will not be caned. But these are only the first steps, and more as needed must come. Rule-based money making is what we need. The government of India has done its bit. The people have done their bit. They are doing more. The regulators need to start believing in the India story. And that is what we shall be looking for. So that's all from this edition of On Point. Thank you.